Welcome to my studio. I'm Father Thomas Loya, a Byzantine Catholic priest from the Eparchy of Parma. And we are here in the studio making visible what is invisible, especially through an art form that is just the essence of making the invisible visible. This is called Byzantine iconography. And we've been in the process of painting this icon. And as you can tell, we start with the biggest shapes. We start with all the canons and the rules and the theology and the prayers. We had mentioned in a previous presentation, the board is properly prepared, the drawing is made and applied. We begin to lay in our big areas. And notice they're dark. They start from the deepest, richest, darkest colors. And we're going to move, as you can kind of see in the face, more and more towards light. Again, this is the process of painting an icon that is an actual participation in the mystery of life, in the incarnation, God, where God, the light of life, the light of the world, Jesus Christ, comes into the world to bring light to a world darkened by sin, a world that needs to be redeemed. And iconography works in exactly that same process because it is a spiritual process. It is a spiritual art. It is the official art of the Church, especially of the Eastern Church. As we lay in the colors, we move more and more towards light, towards the detail. Always the big picture first, then to the details. Get all the rules right, the right attitude, the right approach, the right understanding. In other words, the why behind painting icons. And in our presentations, where we've been making the visible visible, we've always asked and answered that question, the why behind everything. Because unless you know the why, unless you know that why, you don't really know how. Especially when it comes to not only art and the church, theology, but also to the human person, to the whole divine order, the whole created order. The invisible is made visible through the physical, which means the physical points to something beyond itself. There's a why there, a mystical foundation. And that is the worldview of the church, the worldview of what it is to really be human. And that is the worldview that I desire more than anything else to share and impart with everyone else and to catch everyone else up into it. Now, I have the ability to have that worldview, however imperfectly, because I was given by God the ability and the interest of art. The artist is able to see that worldview in a large part. He's able to see the beauty of the divine order, the created order. And he sees that there must be some deeper meaning to it. It must point to something beyond itself. And to communicate that ethos, that worldview of seeing the invisible God revealed and made visible to the physical, we've used not only the art of the church, but also John Paul II's Theology of the Body. I believe that the theology of the body is, well, what I like to call the answer to all of life's questions, because it gives us the why behind everything. And unless we know the why, we don't know the what, especially when it comes to being male and female, man and woman, and all the moral issues. You see, the theology of the body means that the body reveals God. The physical order points to God. And the physical order, let's face it, it's irrefutable. We all have a body, right? No matter what we're like as people, whatever our beliefs are, we all have a body. What does that body mean? Why was it created by God the way it is, especially in its gender, male and female? And our starting point was something actually even beyond ourselves as humans. It was the Holy Trinity, the concept of God. So strong in the Eastern churches, not only in the theology of the body, but also in the Eastern spirituality, where God is a Trinity, very important. A communion and union of persons, union and communion, communion and union. In other words, three persons, distinct persons, divine persons, yet they become one. How can that be? It's a mystery. But it makes all the difference in the world because it makes God out to be a community within himself, almost as though he were the model for family in and of himself in sort of a mystical way. Three distinct persons, never losing their individuality, yet they become one. Now, the reason why that's significant as applied to ourselves and the answers of life is because we look again in the Bible and we find that we are made in that same image. which means that we two are made to be union and communion of persons. This is why we love relationships. This is why we love marriage and love and intimacy. But there's something else about that God that we mentioned, and that this God moved out towards his own creation, actually united himself with his own creation in what is referred to in the Scriptures, and John Paul II picks this up in his Theology of the Body, as a spousal relationship, a spousal mystery. In other words, that God, in a sense, weds his own creation. We become his bride while he is the groom, in a mystical sense, but yet in a very, very real sense. And again, we participate in that reality because we are made like that God, according to the Scriptures. The first thing said in the Bible about human beings. We're made like God, which means we are made for life and love, for intimacy, for begetting children and bringing forth life, and for having friendships and relationships, because that's how God is. Now, this spousal mystery is absolutely fundamental. In fact, John Paul II calls it the fundamental component of human existence. And in fact, it's seen in all of creation. And once we understand that, we begin to understand sort of the DNA of the divine order, the created order, which means we know how to respond, to live in, to participate, to engage the whole created order, to engage the environment, to engage one another. We know what marriage is about, family, love, relationships, the why behind it. If only we understood this theology of the body, this invisible becoming visible through the physical. What we are trying to impart here, through the imperfect and limited means of our art studio here, is an ethos of seeing. An ethos means how you are from the inside, how you look at life with your interior eye, how you interface with life based on your deep belief system and values, your sort of like your worldview. And this worldview that sees the invisible made visible through the physical, is what I believe the truly, truly human, truly Catholic, truly sacramental, truly liturgical, and truly original worldview of the human condition. It's the view that Adam and Eve had before the fall, before the original sin. In fact, it was their shift in the worldview that brought in sin and death and everything related to sin and death, all the maladies of life. That was brought in because there was a shift in their worldview from a non-sacramental. They shifted from a sacramental to a non-sacramental worldview. In other words, when they reached out for that forbidden fruit, in that moment there was a shift in worldview. They, in that moment, no longer saw creation as intimately connected with God. They didn't see it revealing the invisible in a very tangible way. For that one moment, that one reach, and then everything fell apart because of that. So the ethos, this ethos of seeing, to see life correctly, makes all the difference in the world. It's what enables us to understand how we're supposed to relate as human beings, what marriage is about, what family is about, how to interact with the environment even, between nations. It's a fundamental worldview, and it was, I believe, most effectively articulated by John Paul II in his Theology of the Body. Because you see, in the human person, we see the sum total of the whole created order. That's why when I was an artist back in art school, and anyone who goes to art school or trains to be an artist, serious artist, they have to try to master the human body. They draw and paint the human figure, nude models. They look right at the human body in all of its glory, and they try to master it artistically. Why? Because every challenge that an artist will have, even if it's painting icons, will be contained in the human body and the human person. So in art, when you try to grow as an artist, all the artistic challenges, all your creativity, all the many aspects of design and creativity that you'll encounter are going to be faced in the human body. You try to master that, you can do anything artistically. But if you don't, you really can't be a serious artist. Well, a similar thing is true for the world of theology and philosophy. It is in the human person that we see the sum total of all that is in the created order, all that is reflective of God. Remember, we image Him, which means that if we look at ourselves, our whole selves, body, soul, spirit, emotions, feelings, the whole, not just parts, we look at our whole package, our composite. We are like spirits in a body. We are embodied spirits. We are persons, body persons. If you look at that whole package and see what it points to, you'll understand the whole divine order of every aspect of life. I like to take this ethos, this way of seeing, and I like to apply it to a lot of the even moral issues or the issues of the church that are hot button issues today in the world, the moral issues. Because with this view, with this theology of the body, this understanding, this sacramental worldview, everything the church teaches makes sense. Everything the church says is good or says is wrong will be understood clearly when we understand the why behind it. We understand it from this particular worldview. And this worldview of the church, especially when it comes to moral issues, boils down to one thing. This is the truly Catholic ethos. I can boil down the entire Catholic morality, everything the church teaches on what's right or wrong, especially in the areas of human sexuality, human relationships. All those things boil down to one thing. Not the church wanting to ruin our fun, or the church is some kind of stodgy bunch of celibates in Rome, but rather it's a worldview that wants us to have the most fun, the most enjoyment. And it boils down to this one principle. I call it the H zone. You enter the H zone, the honesty zone. If the created order speaks the language, if it points to something beyond itself, especially our bodies as male and female, what do they mean, what do they point to? Then we can either tell a truth or we can tell a lie with the language of our body. In other words, we're not interacting with that physical order correctly, or we are interacting with it correctly. In other words, we're sending the right message. We're being consistent. We're being integrated. We're being honest. When we're honest, good things happen. That's what brings about the other H word, happiness. Holiness and happiness all come from honesty. That's the H zone. And of course, if you're happy and holy long enough, you'll get the big H, heaven. Conversely, if you dishonesty, if you're not honest with the divine order, the created order, the language of the body, then what's going to happen is there's going to be hurt. And quite simply, the church and God does not want us to hurt. That's what makes something right or wrong. It's not a matter of trying to be authoritarian or ruin somebody's fun. It's a matter of wanting to have the most honest existence, because that's what's going to bring about the most fun, the most happiness, the most holiness in this life and, of course, in the next life. So it's a matter of being honest with the language of the body. And to understand that, we have to start looking at what the body says. In our presentations, we've said that the male body and the female body image two aspects of God, just by their very nature, their very design. Men, in their very design of their body, and therefore their heart, mind, soul, remember it's a package deal, they image the transcendence of God in His fatherhood, His initiating love. He takes the first step in love, and he loves no matter what, without even any cause, and He takes the hits for that love. It's sort of a painful brand of love in a sense. It's a very fatherly love, a love that moves outward towards the beloved, to an awesome God, a transcendent God, an incomprehensible God, moving out towards His beloved. That God, that aspect of God, is reflected in the very design of a man's body. This is why men act the way they do in every way. That's why they're what we call today hardwired. There's a why behind it. It's because it reflects that aspect of God. It's not just arbitrary. Gender is not just arbitrary. It's not just preference. It's not insignificant. It has a profound language to it that points to something beyond itself. In a complementary way, we mentioned that a woman's body, with its concentricity, it's sort of designed in a way to reflect then the closeness of God. Women's bodies can act upon the environment to bring things to themselves. They're designed in a sort of a concentricity. They have the gift also of receptivity, which John Paul II calls a genius of womanhood. The genius of womanhood. The receptivity. In that way, because of that gift, they image the human race. In other words, John Paul II calls womanhood the archetype of the whole human race. Why? Because the human race was created by God to stand in a posture of receptivity to His love. That's why we were created, so God could pour His love into us. And of the two genders, He fashioned womanhood to be reflective of that, to say that in her very body, as well as her mind and heart in the way that she is hardwired. We also mentioned that when we adopt this theology of the body ethos, this sacramental worldview, it makes all the difference in the world when we come to things like prayer and approaching God and even worship, such as the Mass or the liturgy or going to church. Liturgy, the Eucharist, is actually, as John Paul II said, and in that he was echoing the fathers of the church and many mystics over the history of the church, liturgy, the Eucharist, is conjugal. And conversely, conjugal relations between man and woman, husband and wife, are in a sense liturgical. In other words, the key there, the key element, looking at it through the theology body glasses, is the word gift, making a gift of self. What happens in the Eucharist? God Himself makes a gift of His body. He gives Himself to us. He, like the bridegroom, is giving His body to His bride, the church. And in fact, the Eucharist, the Mass, the liturgy, is actually the wedding feast of the bridegroom Christ with His bride. And we, in turn, receive that body, and then we reciprocate with the gift of our own body, so that there's this oneness in the Eucharist. We become intimately united with God. The bride and bridegroom become united, as though a wedding were being consummated on the very altar of the church. That is the mystical interpretation of the church in regard to the Eucharist. It's all about gift. So imagine, husband and wife, far from this phrase we hear today of, well, the church would stand of our bedroom. What do those celibates know in Rome? It's actually quite the opposite. The church, God, is the one place you want. The church and God is the one thing you want in the bedroom. It's what gives the bedroom its ultimate meaning. And conversely, when we see what happens in church and Eucharist, we see the meaning of what happens at home between people and vice versa. Liturgy is conjugal, conjugal relationships are liturgical. This is that sacramental worldview. This is taking the whole world of human relationships, of our human existence, of that which makes us most like God, our human sexuality, and putting it back where it belongs, with the proper worldview. It belongs in the sacrament. It belongs in the interior life of God. It is reflective of God. It is our participation in the way God loves. It's not separated. It's not something foreign. It's not something dirty and here's God and what's holy over here. No, the two are actually one. The two are integrated in this sacramental, correct, human, liturgical worldview. I would like to take these principles and apply them to other things as well. In fact, sometimes I like to joke, especially with my young people in my parish. I'll ask them, let's play Stump the Priest. Ask me anything I can't explain through the theology of the body principles, and so far they haven't succeeded. They ask me about all kinds of things, sports, the price of gas, everything. How do you explain that through the theology of the body? If you say, Father, that it's the answer to everything, well, we can. Because, remember, it's the DNA of the created order. Apply it to everything. How about stewardship, finances, money? Now that sounds pretty banal, pretty mundane, but not really. Again, the key word here is gift. Gift of self. The Eucharist, stewardship, is all about gift. Giving and receiving in a sort of a reciprocal fashion. Wouldn't it be interesting if our attitude towards money, towards stewardship, towards the way we give to church was more biblically based? more deeply based in this concept of giftedness. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, in both the Old and the New Testament, we see examples such as when Moses was going to build a tabernacle and he called forth the Israelites. He said, "Give according to the way God has given to you so that we can accomplish this task to glorify God." Well, a few chapters later, what happens is Moses has to call off the Israelites. He says, "I'm getting too much. You're donating too much. I have enough. Stop already." Why did they do that? Because Moses asked them, look in your heart and give according to how you see God has given to you. Now that's stewardship. That's a stewardship of giftedness, not what's the bare minimum, how much should I give? Not even tithing. Tithing is a good practice, but you know what? Tithing is not enough when we come to the New Testament. In the New Testament, we see an event that happened that is in the life of St. Paul. He was taking up a collection, and he was speaking about the Macedonians. This is in 2 Corinthians. And he said, you know, those Macedonians, they were poor, and I told them they didn't have to give in this collection. It's all right, you're exempt. The Macedonians begged him to give because they didn't want to be deprived of so great a witness of Christianity. So they dig down deep. They could not afford it, but they dug down deep and brought forth to Paul to give to the poor people of Jerusalem this tremendous donation. And Paul said, he boasted about them, he said, do you know why they're able to do that? Because they first gave their hearts to God, and then the rest came naturally. This is a theology of the body stewardship plan. This is how you can take these principles and apply them to good stewardship, to good finances. Imagine if we did that. The economy of the United States would be drastically different. The economy of the world would be different, wouldn't it? Maybe you could help the poor more definitively, more effectively. All kinds of good things can happen if we had the right worldview, even to money. How about the environment? What do we do with the environment? A lot of talk today about pollution and about going green or not going green, or lack of it or too much of it. There's all kinds of confusion about the environment. Once again, theology of the body to the rescue, the sacramental worldview. What is the environment? What is this earth? It's a gift from God. It's holy. It points to God. How do you interact with something if you see it? Again, there's the secret. How do you see it? If you see it as holy, if you see it as speaking a language that points to God, how would you interact with it? Well, no, you wouldn't worship it. You wouldn't go overboard with it and be extreme. You would interact with it in a very balanced and integrated way, in an honest way. The world is like God's garden. It reveals Him. Therefore, it should be cared for. We shouldn't just be raping the earth. We shouldn't just be selfish and overly consuming with the world's resources. It should be distributed more equitably. We should care more about the other guy, the other nation. Find ways to sanctify the environment. Not to go overboard, but to sanctify it. This is a liturgical worldview. It's what Adam and Eve did when they walked in that garden. Remember in Genesis? God assigns Adam to the Garden of Eden, and He says, cultivate it, to cultivate the garden. The word cultivate in its original biblical meaning meant to act on something as though you were acting like the Lord. In other words, to steward it with love and care and fairness and justice and respect. Adam, symbolic now of the whole human race, was called to look at the whole world and to approach the world, creation itself, nature, as a priest, to see it filled with the presence of God and to offer it back to God in praise and thanksgiving. Imagine if we adopted a priestly worldview to creation and to the environment. We wouldn't pollute it. We wouldn't underuse it. We wouldn't be selfish about it. We wouldn't abuse it. And it all depends upon this world view. Well, we can go on and on and on, one subject after another, and see it through the eyes, the lens, the glasses of the theology of the body. In other words, the body, the physical world, summed up in the human person, precise in our gender bodies, points to God. And once we understand that about the whole created world, we understand church and liturgy and marriage. We understand everything better. And we know how to be human, how to be a male, how to be a female, how to interact with the environment and the world's resources, how to manage finances better. It's all about this one simple but encompassing worldview. All we have to do is take invisible realities. Even though they're invisible, they're still very true. God, love, fairness, intimacy, friendship. Those aren't things you can put in somebody's hand. Does that mean they're not real? No, they're the most real things. So we take those things that are most real, even though they're invisible. See, the most real things are things which are invisible and eternal. We think it's the other way around, but it's not. The most real things, what could be more real than love? But can you put it in my hand? No. What does that mean? It doesn't exist? Of course not. It's the most real thing. Well, how do you take that invisible thing that is so real and make it so real to us in the physical world? How do you make it visible? That's the trick. First of all, by seeing it. By seeing the physical world is pointing to God, especially ourselves as human beings, precisely as males and females. And you carry that through everything. And this is the true Catholicism, as it were. This is the true sacramental approach to life. Catholicism is not a religion. I think we should stop calling it a religion. Yeah, it is technically. It's a way of looking at life and a way of interacting with life that is most authentically human. It is mystical, it is sacramental, it is original, it is liturgical. And whether it's prayer in the Eucharist, marriage, intimacy between friends, husband and wife, children, parent, whatever it is, it's about making the invisible visible through the created world, this holy, blessed, created world. Let's go back to our icon. I'm going to start to now open it up more so that it will more and more reveal the invisible world of God. Remember, it is theology in color. And iconography is a holy art. It's a process. It's an actual participation in this process of making visible what is invisible. And in painting this icon, I'm painting not just an icon or a painting. I, and you too, can participate in the process of the invisible being made visible.